There's a thing they do in Star Trek that they've done in like all the series that they call it the Prime Directive. It's essentially like a space law that says they can't interfere with some culture that is like new in its development. And it usually refers to like a more like technologically like less advanced culture. You can't go showing them what a starship looks like. They have to like get there on their own. It's kind of like a non-interference and like respect for how a culture wants to develop and the customs they want to develop. Because if you interfere too soon and just teach them the way you do it, it will disrupt it, and then they will become like you, and they are not like themselves as much anymore. You know, that's real tricky for a teacher since you're like involved materially and like everything. But we keep mentioning it in the book because it's something you should think about. And there's no like perfect way of pulling off the Prime Directive, but it feels like the best programs, in my opinion, have that respect for like what their students are trying to make.
Welcome to Music Ed Tech Talk, a podcast exploring the topics of music, education, technology, and the intersections between them, with a special focus on the productive and creative process. I'm your host, Robby Burns. Thanks to my sponsor this week, the DMV Percussion Academy, a summer percussion workshop in Maryland. This workshop is for students grades 6 through 12. Students experience clinics, masterclasses, personal coaching, and college career advice by the region's top performers and educators. Students will also present a percussion ensemble concert at the end of the week. The clinician list is full of local and national all-stars. Be sure to check it out and follow the program on social media at DMV Percussion. You can learn more and register at dmvpercussion.org. Find your rhythm at the best percussion workshop around. We hit different.
I've got like the coffee just kicked in, and so did the Sudafed. Like I'm ready to go, man.
Oh my goodness! I'm there with you. I stayed up till midnight watching this season finale of For All Mankind, which is pretty good.
I haven't checked it out.
I think it's pretty good. It's like high concept historical fiction, which wouldn't normally be my thing, but you know, space.
Sure, yeah.
Like a good space show.
Yeah, space is good.
Yeah, I've been enjoying the Deep Space Nine Twitter that's been happening.
I was very sad to get to the end of Deep Space Nine.
I imagine. I've never watched more than like an episode or two of Star Trek anything, and it's for long been on our to-do list. I know.
Whoa.
I mean, don't watch Deep Space Nine first, though.
Next Generation is obviously the best one, but...
it pairs well with Deep Space Nine.
It's different. It's like a different vibe. Like I felt like Deep Space Nine was kind of like a politics show almost. Like,
yeah, it's like The Wire in space.
Yeah. Huh.
Oh, yeah. And it's like if you're looking for like they go to a new planet every week, like it's not what it's about.
Yeah. Right. So, I mean, where do I start is the thing, because I
mean, Next Generation is pretty friendly.
I feel like the very first like Borg episode of Star Trek Next Generation, where like Q just like introduces them to the Borg and then like saves them at the end. That's a pretty good one, I think, because you get like a taste of how crazy the show can be, but like without diving you too deep into it. What do you think about that, Ethan? I'm curious what your take on that is, because like you've been recently into it. I'm kind of more tangentially into it right now.
Yeah, I mean the Borg, like, so you know the beautiful thing about Next Generation is that it was like they were not assuming that you had seen every episode. Like it was broadcast television, so you had to be able to enter at any point.
And it's like the early episodes are a little stiff, and they kind of find their groove around the end of season 2. That's how I felt about it, at least.
Yeah, that's true of all the Star Trek shows.
That sounds to me like a little bit like work, but I'm willing to put in the work. She'll have some pretty good news to share, right? I mean,
yes, we
do. We're to start the podcast here. This is where we start the podcast.
Oh, you know, I love my B-roll. You'll have a book coming. What is the date that someone can put it in their shopping cart and it'll like immediately, you know, get put in a box and shipped to their front door?
It says June 21st right now of a shipping date, but I think usually the electronic version's available a little before that.
Okay.
If it's like the other book that I did, so it's like, yeah, it might be that month or something. You can start getting it.
Right on. So, I mean, yeah, Will, last time you were on, we talked a little bit about this. It was an earlier stage in the process, but yeah, I mean, you both are very, very soon your book Electronic Music School will be available. I mean, people can pre-order it now. So, I mean, I would like to just, before we get into then they should. You should hit the pause button unless you're driving. You should pause this, and then there will be a link to where you can buy it in the notes, and then you should just go ahead and pre-order it right now. I'll just get that out of the way.
A hard sell. There it is.
Well, I mean, and then of course, if you're hesitant, we are going to, of course, now talk about it and other adjacent topics. Maybe one of you should introduce the general topic of the book.
Yeah, Ethan should definitely introduce the book. He describes it very eloquently.
It's only superficially a book about music technology. It's really a book about musical creativity and the teaching of musical creativity. And we believe that musical creativity is best taught by creative musicians themselves. And we recognize that a lot of music teachers have just not had the opportunity to explore and develop that part of themselves. So, when we say, hey, you should do this project, before you do it in class, some of that is just make sure you understand the procedural steps. But a lot of it is make sure to experience sticking your neck out there and, making a beat and making a song and feel both the joy and terror involved in doing that.
Yeah. So the book is written from two perspectives. One is my perspective as a person who's been in a public school teaching music technology for about 16 years, and starting from a place where there weren't many templates for doing that kind of a thing in a public high school, and the lessons that I've learned. And then the other perspective is Ethan coming from a research background, and basically we're meeting in the middle with a good description of how the pedagogy works and how to practically implement it. And it comes off as, hopefully it comes off as a helpful guide for anybody who's wanting to start a music tech program at their school, or people who are interested in learning more about how to teach music tech or how to design lessons around electronic music production. And we take you through the whole thing. We take you through the philosophy of why you should teach through creating music, some would call composition, but take you through that, through the politics of how to pitch it to various stakeholders in a school, through how to set up a lab, then through a whole curriculum of lessons, how to write your own lessons, troubleshooting the lessons, future-proofing the lessons, and then finally making the work you're doing in a lab class resonate with the broader community through after-school groups and other kinds of extracurriculars.
Yeah, I mean, the reason that as I've been kind of watching y'all work through this over the past few years, the reason it's so exciting to me is because of exactly how holistic it is. I mean, having I think any teacher who's going to, be in the middle of their career and go buy a book is going to want to some degree to be able to cherry pick some things that are going to just help them survive the week, which sounds like the lesson plans will help with that. But then there's also a really, really big need to, still, I feel like there is a fight amongst music educators to, there's still a fundamental belief that popular music styles are not legitimately gonna fit into what we do as music teachers. And I feel like there's this, is that Ethan, where the research is sort of backing up this more philosophical approach?
Yeah, we are strong believers in the basic validity of popular music, which is a term that only exists in music education. It's what the rest of the world just knows as music, but more specifically electronic dance music, hip hop, and related pop styles, because it's just music. It's all just music. You can do it well or badly. There's plenty of boring and terrible dance music, and there's plenty of super creative and exciting dance music. It's just a container that you can fill with anything, as with jazz and classical and anything else that you might want to teach. But pop music does have a couple of specific advantages over those styles. One of them is the students actually like it, so that helps with engagement. It is they walk into the room with a lot of implicit knowledge of it. So even if they've never played an instrument or touched, digital audio workstation, their ears are well trained. They know how stuff is supposed to sound, and that is a lot of the challenge, when you're trying to make any kind of music.
This has been the first year I have had consistent, standardized access to a notation editor and a digital audio workstation with my general music class. It's just blown open the door for what we can do, because I've been kind of doing different forms with the general music class, but we've been doing a lot of songs and we've been doing a lot of remix assignments. And the results are super interesting to me, because while technically I have set up the template so that all of the sound trap loops are in the same key as whatever the melody of the song is that they've chosen, I kind of want to tie this to this idea of like what is or isn't intuitive and how does the teacher sort of shape that process, because I find such an interesting variety in like how they approach specifically the harmony of the loops. Like it's clear that there's like a love of this music based on like how some of them really go for it, like stacking like the coolest loops in Soundtrap like on top of each other, but there's not like always necessarily like what some might call an intuition about like where phrases start and end, and like what the note content of the loops are, like how that is involved with the melodic content of the vocal part. So I don't know, I'm just curious. This has been something that I sort of was like musing on Twitter the other day about teaching middle schoolers harmony. Do you feel like that implicit knowledge that kids bring with these styles is like, how does a teacher take that and then shape that into someone who is like understanding these sort of like underlying musical concepts like form, harmony, melody, rhythm?
Okay, so take what you're talking about, and music's tricky because it's such a entrenched tradition. We've got hundreds of years of tradition, of inertia with certain rules and things. On top of that, you've got pop music changing rapidly on kind of the top layer of that. Picture something more recent like photography or like making movies. Where did the rules for that come from? It came from people looking at things they liked and trying to do some pattern recognition on it, saying, does it look better when the person's in the center of the frame or when they're on the third of the frame? Does it look better when the low light scene is this way or it's that way? And with pop music, you're kind of taking some of that music theory stuff, which Ethan put this really nicely on something we were on one time, where music theory is like a helpful set of language to describe music. You're taking some of that you have from your training formally, and you're applying some of that descriptive musicology to pop music. And you say like, well, what do a lot of songs do here? And how do a lot of songs approach bass lines? And how do a lot of songs approach chord progressions? And it changes, but you have language you can use to describe it that's not prescriptive in the kind of way that a lot of us learned music theory, where a lot of us learned no parallel fifths, like everybody knows no parallel fifths, when that doesn't seem to be a concern with a lot of pop music. So maybe that's
so
like
to
not
say that you have to use parallel fifths. Like you kind of have to.
It's a useful
Right.
tool. It's not a bad sound. We don't dislike it, but what are some things we do dislike in pop music? And having like really irregular phrasing that doesn't make any sense is kind of a problem. Like you mentioned, when kids will first get in a DAW and start dragging the pre-recorded loops in, a lot of times it's formless, right? There's this and that and changes and this and that, and they're not really thinking about the overall like structure of the song. So like there's something that's like a thing you do need to like say, like, this, you've heard it. You ever listen to a song and say, I know when this beat's going to drop, I just can feel it coming right here, this is where you dance. And like people know that on like a gut level, where they don't realize what their brain knows is they're sensing 8-bar phrases. And there's something that like the music teacher knows how to like communicate that. So a lot of teaching pop music is not like being the coolest person in the room. It's being able to describe the patterns that you're observing, and not trying to say, well, this song didn't do it right or didn't do it wrong. It's more like, what did it do? You're just trying to describe it.
Yeah, that makes sense. Thank you also for cutting me off. My question asking skills are like utterly just garbage. So
you're great. You're such
a,
no. I love being on your podcast because you never know what's going to happen next, and it's always enjoyable. And we're going to cover all kinds of ground.
You just love me. We talked about like the general thesis of this book, and then I just launched right into the weeds. Like, how do you sequence harmony and form? And
well, I mean, that's like what you just asked was like that's a lot of people that are local to me that saw what I was doing and started to replicate it. They have their own versions of that where it's like if they're how are they describing how layers of harmony work with bass lines and chords and melodies, and depending on their background they're going to try to describe that all kinds of different ways. And that's where like the more you do it, you start to just realize like, okay, what have they heard before? Have they heard the phrase like top line melody before, or do they think of it just as far like chords and bass? Or because like if you're using like orchestra scoring terms to describe these things, it doesn't land as well. So like I feel like if you're trying to do it and you're a halfway decent teacher, you will eventually land on the same answers that we landed on, which is you have to meet the kids where they are to get the results you want. It's less important that they call everything the right name than it is they get the experience you're trying to give them.
Yeah, I think actually, so experience is an interesting word because like it's the exact nature of what for me a lot of general music classes are, which is like sort of just combinations of like grab bags of experiences. And so I guess this, and I don't know that there's like really an answer to this, but I guess where I was trying to go with that questioning is just like, for me, having grown up in, I studied like classical percussion in undergrad. So it's like, I took my 4 semesters of music theory. We did
same here, buddy.
1s and 5s for like the first 3 semesters, and then atonal. 5. We learned pretty much like T-do, unless you're like using a secondary dominant, but then it's still T-do. That was pretty much the like first 3 semesters of music theory. And then it was like going to, getting extra credit by going to Roger Reynolds concerts in Baltimore City for atonal music theory. And
H-Bob.
And I love all of that stuff. And I know, I think that sequence of understanding how music works for me, but I also, since my like beginning days holding drumsticks and like smashing in heavy metal bands, like I've always been taking an interest in other things that are happening musically outside of that. In fact, I would argue that I'm a late bloomer when it comes to like this like classical Western tradition of all that harmony theory. So it's just interesting to me, like some of it comes as second nature, but as I kind of like to quote this, and I won't actually quote it because I don't have it near me, but basically like Suzuki is known for saying basically that like intuition is, he's talking about natural ability, and he's saying that basically there is no natural ability. There is intuition, but sometimes we think that intuition is natural ability, but actually it's really just learning that happens subconsciously somewhere along the way. And I think that what Ethan was saying about having so much listening just happening to these musical styles, in our students' lives, that definitely is like a whole lot of subconscious learning that's happening and developing this intuition. And for me, being for the first year, finally having access to some of the tools where we can make this music, I'm just like excited to keep exploring what, how am I going to take what feels like a grab bag of experiences and try to like actually like, teach some underlying musical concepts through those experiences. That's, I guess, what I'm excited to explore.
Yeah. I would be, quick to point out that, what we are talking about in the book doesn't mean to compete with traditional stuff. I think they can coexist quite nicely in the same way that jazz and classical music coexist. It's just different terms
making the menu bigger.
Exactly.
Right. There is definitely this perceived threat, I think, amongst the the traditional people, the performing arts teachers who think that like band, choir, orchestra is like everything always and forever. But I'm wondering how you feel about like that perceived threat, and like do you consider this book to be for performing arts teachers too, or like just people who are doing the general music?
Okay, so I do think that some people will read this book and feel that it is confrontational in the way that you're describing. I know that some people will read this book and feel that way because they've told me. But I do think that if you read what we actually write about, we are very careful to point Now, in kind of an empathetic way, like we get it, music training has been focused very mainly on like performance and the physical skills associated with performance. And because of technological constraints in history, saving stuff like theory and composition and study of music and production of music till much later in the process is what you had to do, because otherwise you couldn't communicate musically without having some performance skills. And
I mean, if you want to blow a trumpet solo, you got to be pretty good at.
And if you want to, write a movie score in the 1970s, you have to be able to play piano to be able to write it down. Like, you won't know what it sounds like if you don't. But as things have progressed, that becomes more and more divorced. How you can create something sonic that is replicatable versus how much you have to perform it live. And what we've found in our practice is that you can start creatively writing music at a much earlier place in your performing ability. In fact, you can do it right at the beginning if you really want to with tools. And it's like the pedagogy is different because the goal is different. So it's introducing a new branch of pedagogy that's focused on creating recorded works, which is never meant to compete with performing and like the actual performance skills. I mean, I highly revere people who get really good at performing. Both my kids in music lessons, like I think it's just a different task. It's like comparing, I don't know, it's like comparing like race car driving with yoga or something.
Yeah, like can't we have both? But now let us be clear too. Like, we want people to do band, choir, and orchestra. We would like those numbers to grow or at least stop shrinking. And we actually believe that having a robust music tech program, songwriting, beat making, whatever you want to call it, will benefit the traditional ensembles, not compete with them.
We don't just believe it. There's data to back that up, that getting more kids involved in a music department makes the music department better overall, makes the numbers go up, makes the engagement rise, makes the profile rise. Everybody's happy.
And I am a person who, there's a sociologist named Joe Saunders who coined the term disengaged alternative musician, right? A person who self-identifies as a musician and takes music very seriously, but is not in the school music program. That was me. I bagged on orchestra after 8th grade when it became optional. I bagged on choir after it became optional because the music that they were playing was not interesting to me and still isn't. And meanwhile, it was like all I cared about and all I was interested in. I was like, hey, if I could learn how to play Grateful Dead songs, this would be my number one favorite class, right? They just weren't meeting me where I lived. And as it turns out, like, I got super into Bach after a jazz guitar teacher was like, hey, it would really help your jazz improvising, the violin partitas and sonatas. And he was correct, it did.
And I would say, like, from an opposite standpoint, I was deeply entrenched in school music. I lived in the band room and I was in every band I could be in and I loved it. And I badly wanted to be able to write music. And I listened to a lot of electronic music. I wanted to be able to write that stuff. But even beyond that, I wanted to be able to write stuff for the instruments I played, and the tools just weren't there. There was no training on the technique of how to make a recording, how to input notes, how to make a MIDI arrangement. And like, this is the 90s. So it's like, those are all kind of new skills anyway. And it's kind of funny because like, I remember one of my teachers was doing his master's degree in some sort of field like that. And like his assignments had to do with MIDI arranging. And I remember him even mentioning like time at one point because it was like a brand new organization and stuff. And it's like, it was all very new, right? And so we have a generation of teachers in service right now where that's all kind of the Wild West, and people who want to dip their toe in the water or want to go full blast and have a music tech program, there's not a ton of templates, and the templates that are out there seem like really highly specific to individuals. So like, our idea with this book was, let's write the book where you can use it as the method for that.
Yeah, I continue to take for granted so many experiences in my life where I just got exposure to this kind of stuff outside of the classroom. Like I was saying, I was like playing in bands, I mean, like for me, it was the first love was not like marimba, it was drum set. And I look at all this and I think to myself, it's really quite amazing that like no one in my actual like college experience ever asked me to write a song, like as part of my music education program. Never once.
Wow. I mean, I feel like we had to arrange stuff, but it was always, for some kind of function of like, you're going to have to arrange a string quartet someday, or you're going to have to write the Star Spangled Banner out for the marching, but one of those kind of task-based things. It was very optional for music ed students to take any of the composition courses. But yeah,
I did tons of that, but never, I mean, and I know Ethan, you've been like doing this exact thing with some of your students right now. I mean, I was never, no one ever said like write a song. Like it was always a brass quintet, a percussion ensemble, or like transcribe this thing, like what are you experiencing right now, Ethan, like with doing this with college age students?
So literally right before this call was the final meeting of the semester of the NYU Popular Music Practicum for the music education majors. And this was the first year when NYU opened it up to include songwriting to their credit. And so I just had the students like write a bunch of songs and I scaffolded them. So, the first project was take an existing set of lyrics and take an existing tune and write new lyrics for it. And they could do it like Weird Al style and be silly, and many of them did, or they could be serious about it. The next thing was to take an existing set of lyrics and write a new tune for it. And then they had to write a rap verse. And if they wanted to, they could model it on an existing flow and rhyme scheme and use an existing instrumental, or they could just go from scratch. And then the final project, which we listened to today, was just, okay, now write a completely original song. And if you want, you could have, they were allowed to take their new lyrics that they wrote for an existing tune and write a new tune, right? Just knock out the scaffolding, which several of them did. And, many of them expressed terror going into this. These are, music ed majors, so they're mostly classical with a few jazz and musical theater people. And it went great. They had the best time. I had the best time. Yeah, it was experiential learning in all its glory. I would recommend it to anyone.
Is that a required class for the music ed majors?
Yes, it is. Yeah, this is NYU is, God bless them. They're pushing really hard.
That's great. Songwriting.
Yeah, that's definitely different.
That's awesome, man.
Yeah, that's cool. Any and all things that your students have shared publicly, I'd love to link into the show notes of this.
I will certainly pass those along.
Is there anything we've talked about so far that you all want to elaborate on, or is there anything in the book that we haven't hit on that you definitely want to talk about?
Let's talk about scaffolding. So, with college students, you can just say, yeah, go take an existing set of lyrics and write a new tune for it, and they will figure that out. If you're teaching kids, you definitely have to scaffold more. And a lot of what's in the book is how do you sequence and pace so that, especially if you have students coming in with a wide range of prior musical knowledge and ability, which in a music tech class you definitely will. Yeah, how do you make it so that the beginners aren't overwhelmed?
Exactly, and I think that's from where I was coming from teaching it. When I realized that, as Ethan put it, there's no filter on the door. It's like I want to make that first experience, because like here's kids. Here's how it works in most school districts: is everybody's in music class up until like grade 5 or 6. And then they start going into ensembles and they start picking and choosing. And by the time that they're in high school, on average, only about 20% of the student body's in a music class. So, coming at it from the perspective that some of these kids haven't like been in a music class or made any music since grade 6. So I want the opposite effect of what I call traumatic piano lessons, which, we all know what that looks like, right? Old lady yelling at you, smacking your fingers when you miss a wrong note. Like that's traumatic piano lessons. And a lot of kids, that's like their last experience with music usually is something similar to that. So everything is engineered so it's like achievable by everybody. At the same time, you've got kids who are just killers on their instrument. And not only that, you've got usually an age variation too. You got freshmen mixed with seniors and stuff like that. So you've got some kids who are able to make more mature sounding music. And then you've got other kids who are like, don't know the first thing, right? So every project has to Ethan has such a way with phrases. Low floors and high ceilings, I think, is the phrase you use.
Yeah, that's which is not original. That's like an education theory thing.
Well, I don't read any books, so I mean that's great. That's an Ethan original to me, and I just like that is exactly what it's like. Basically, I kind of compare it to, I took a seminar on like science teaching one time, which I'm not a science teacher, but you got a free iPad if you took this class, so I took it, and the way that they did it was like the opposite of how I do it. And it's like the same idea, but like the goals are different. Like what they were doing is they had a whole bunch of junk they give you, and you had to figure out how to make these two things balance. And eventually you do these playful kind of experiments until you eventually landed on F equals ma or something like that. You know, it was like you're going to converge on whatever the Newtonian law they're trying to teach you is, but instead of them just teaching it to you, you get to experiment a little bit. And these are backwards from that, where if we're trying to make a remix, we have to say like, okay, we're trying to make a remix. It has to have an a cappella vocal track of some kind, and it has to have background music that matches that a cappella track. If that doesn't happen, it's not going to sound like a remix. It's going to sound like something else, and we're going to not have a mission accomplished for everybody. So you get those things out of the way first, whatever the core technical skill is for the project that is a required element of the project. And then as you build the project out, there are more opportunities to make that project your own and include your own voice in it. So I think in a lot of education circles, they call those like stretch goals or something like that, where it's like the goals can kind of match the students who need the enrichment. But instead of just being like extra work, it's like meaningful to them because they get to put their own stamp on it instead of just having the generic basic project. And the generic basic project is designed so it sounds satisfying to especially somebody who's only able to accomplish that. They can feel proud of it and feel like they walked away with something that sounded good, because that's the thing, that kids might not have high musical skills, but they have like high standards of taste, which is like sometimes a dangerous combination.
Yeah.
So, you know, because if they are a beginner and they make something that sounds bad to them, they think they're bad and they don't want to do it. So you got to give them these like projects that are designed so that everybody wins. Some people are able to really do something more mature earlier, but that doesn't make it like make the other person less than, you know?
Yeah, I've heard you say, Will, before that in order to accomplish that, you have to do so much more prep work as the teacher to actually make the students perceive the work as easy.
Oh yeah. That's where we start the whole curriculum part of the book with a big chapter about how these projects are designed, because the hope is that that's what comes across to, you know, people like you who are reading the book, is you're kind of seeing between the lines and not just like doing my lessons. You're doing your own version of lessons that will work in the same way that these lessons have worked for me. Because your school is different than my school, right? You know, your kids are different than my kids, but having projects that function in this way is like a great template.
And we do like think it's very important for people to be at that meta level of understanding how to design the projects, because, you know, music tech, like it ages like a flounder on a hot sidewalk. Yeah. Like, you know, we want this book to still be useful in a couple of years, and the only way to future-proof is just keep it fresh, right? Just keep it moving, keep coming up, you know, keep responding to what the students are listening to and what is happening in the broader culture. And so, you know, rather than it just being a set of lesson plans that are super useful this year and then totally useless in 3 years, you know, we wanted to impart like, yeah, this methodology for designing good creative projects around music tech, so that, you know, it's a methodology that you can just keep employing, you know, for forever, we hope.
Yeah, that's an interesting and a good thing to point out, because, you know, I think people hear lesson plans or think of lesson plans and you know, they, especially when music technology is, to some teachers who end up teaching it, is like this unfamiliar territory for them. I think it's always easy to want like the prescription for like, here are the steps for where you click, you know, where you teach the students to click. but what you're describing sounds a lot more like, here's sort of like the underlying principles of like how to understand and approach these musical styles, and then use them with technology, not necessarily specific technology, but I guess more broadly like computers. But and I guess you would say to that point, this is not like specifically an Ableton Live curriculum. Like it's pretty, like that's what you both use. I would imagine maybe there's some screenshots of that, but like this is like how specific to the tool is it? My impression is not so much, right?
We do use it for the examples, and we do refer to some specific functions of that software where there's not an easy general term for it. There are a few shots of the push and things like that, but we tried to be agnostic about it, because not just because we want people to pick up the book, but also it's like these are general lessons that will work in most software. We're both most comfortable with Live, and it's what we use with our students. So it's a natural fit for us to describe it in those terms, especially since we kind of also believe that to be like the tool of choice right now. That's the part that, might not age super well. Who knows? We don't know. You got to roll the dice sometimes, because our other option was like trying to describe everything totally agnostically, which that didn't sound like it was going to look or read well. So most of the projects are totally agnostic. There's a few that mention specific tools, but I think our approach, like we try to give our readers some credit, and they don't necessarily need to be told exactly where to click and exactly where to poke at the software like they did 20 years ago. And I'm really hoping that people can pick this book up and say, here's like a general outline of the procedure day to day of a lesson and what needs to get made at certain checkpoints. But I use Logic and I can accomplish it this way, or I use Pro Tools and I can take this part of the project out and substitute it with this keyboard that I have in my lab or something. And that's like the real idea is like, take band, you're a band teacher. Like there are things that everybody likes to do, but not everybody does it. Like not everybody does Jim Swearingen pieces. And, somebody might say you should do those pieces, but like, there's other ways to accomplish those goals, and it's okay. And they would understand a book that referenced a bunch of Jim Swearingen pieces.
Yeah, that's good way of putting it. Okay, I might be pivoting. So Ethan, you've described this book as on one level being about making music with computers, but then on another level sort of having this theme of like fighting racism with music education. Can you like unpack that? I'm like curious how that sort of like philosophy interweaves itself into a book that also has like really hands-on sort of like how-tos and lesson plans.
So Leroy Jones in the book Blues People said, or Miri Baraka that is, said, oh no, not Miri Baraka, sorry, Stephen Feld, an ethnomusicologist, said, like American popular music is a euphemism for Black music. That I think Amiri Baraka said basically the same thing, that like, in the US, literally all of our popular and vernacular music comes partially or entirely from African Americans and other, groups as well. I mean, certainly like Native Americans and, Latinos and many, many other people have had major influences, but like the core, right, the stretching from like the blues, ragtime, jazz through country, R&B, rock, funk, disco, hip hop, techno into the present, all of that comes out of African American music. And all of our quote art music unquote until real recently was from Western Europe. And like, yeah, now jazz is art music too, but that is real recent and still not totally, not everybody is completely on the same page about it even now, right? And so, so for me, like, as a person who liked, rock and hip hop, like, every other kid who I knew in New York City when I was growing up, I was like, oh, gee, all the music that I like is Black and all the music that's available in music class is white. Huh. I didn't think of it in those terms, but that is what was essentially going on. And I was a white kid, right? Like but it still challenged my self-identity like that extremely. And white kids are a substantial minority in New York City public schools. I believe they are a minority nationwide in public schools and are going to be a minority just in general pretty soon in the US. So we're pitching our sort of notion of quote good music unquote to a fairly outdated and rapidly shrinking kind of sense of what the American cultural identity even is. That's a problem.
Yeah, I mean, I would say this book, it's not at the centerpiece of the book necessarily.
No, it's like the last chapter.
That's in the background though, because we do have to lean into that discomfort a little bit because, and you might, this is where like sometimes the book might take on like a confrontational tone a little bit, because we know from our own experiences that this is like a touchy point for some people.
Oh, do we know?
And yeah, and so, we could dance around it, we could exclude it from the book entirely, but if you're going to start a pop music focused program in a school, you're going to experience certain questions about it. You're going to experience certain complaints about it. And it's like everybody's going to go on this journey with you. That was like a discussion early when like we decided to do this book together is, Ethan's doing all this research in hip hop. And there's not a ton of hip hop in the book as far as like you should do a lot of hip hop with your students.
Yeah, I mean, we don't talk about like lyric writing at all.
Yeah, there's hardly anything about lyrics in the entire book, I think. But the whole like you will experience questions at the very least about why are you teaching this, and in our experience, a lot of those questions will come from other music teachers, and there's a variety of reasons for that. Most of them are very well-intentioned reasons. So we're not trying to like pick fights or anything. However, we have had fights picked with us, and sometimes we pick fights too. And we know a little more maybe than the average music teacher about the kinds of controversy that you'll encounter if you go full in and start teaching music tech, start teaching pop music, start teaching music production, beat making. How does that fit into the curriculum? Is it competing with the traditional classes? That's like the earliest question I ever got. Is this supposed to take over? But even just like other more like less cultural questions, like so are you going to compete with other schools doing this? And like, how are you going to steal money from the band to pay for this stuff? Like all of these questions, like how does this fit in basically? And it's tricky because, to what Ethan's point is, culture is different maybe than what music teacher culture is. I noticed this early on, not just from like a demographic standpoint, just from like a philosophical standpoint, like what is music? It means something different to the kids than it means something to the music teachers. And neither party is necessarily wrong. It's just they're not aware of each other's viewpoints.
Like, we want to be clear here. Like, we do not hate the Western canon. We actually love the Western canon. Like, I mean, speaking of the Bach violin partitas and sonatas, like the main thing I do with my guitar for recreation is I'm like learning a bunch of Bach violin partitas and sonatas on the guitar. Like, we love that stuff. However, historically, that music has been used to exclude other musics and to like, and has been held up as like kind of the universal standard of quality and truth. And there's, like it's better now than it was a generation ago or 2 generations ago. But even now you hear people talking about how, like Beethoven transcends time and place. And it's, like music is a universal language. It just happens to be the one that we speak. And that is a problem.
Yeah, I approach like this book and the genres that are in it and things almost in the same way you'd approach like how to classify music from different parts of the world that has like different rules than a lot of Western music. It's like, it's not wrong and you're not wrong. Neither person is wrong. It is different. And here are some ways that it's different. Here's the patterns I recognize. And that's kind of like an alternative approach, I guess, for a lot of music teachers, but that's not a controversial approach in my opinion, at least. So, but we do anticipate that question. So we have a chapter about, what are various stakeholders going to say when you start teaching this or start pitching this class. And, musicians have worked their whole life in most cases to get where they are. And it's crazy, right? Like you can go into college and not know what you want to do in year one, and year four you come out a math teacher. You can't do that with music. You go in having prepared for several years before you go into music school to be a teacher. And this is like this is a lifetime commitment. I mean, it's like how the word conservatory comes from the word for orphanage, because like that's how long it takes, right? It's like you have to dedicate your life to this. And like we're competing with that in a way where we're saying like, here's a new way to teach music. Here's some stuff that's outside your experience that we think is important. But we also realize that there's a lot of one-off classes that are being offered that could use some spice. We're not telling everybody to quit teaching band and, do what I do all day, but, some people might. But most people are going to have, one or two classes of this, and it's interspersed throughout their day, kind of like you, Robby. And it's like, what's the best way to do this? And this is why we wrote a book. We kind of feel like this is the best way to do it.
And we hope, by the way, also like, a familiar form of pushback that we get is, oh, this is the McDonaldization of music education, right? It's just giving the kids what they want, not what they need. And we hope that, for like classically trained educators coming at this, they're going to be pleasantly surprised once they start engaging dance music and hip hop, because there is a lot. I mean, it is a bottomlessly rich and enormously wide, sort of swath of genres. And I mean, for my ears, like the most, creative music being made in the world is being made in these styles, and the biggest risks are being taken. And here we're talking not just about stuff on the radio, although I gotta say, stuff on the radio tends to sound pretty awesome. But especially when you like get past what is currently on the radio and start digging into, we have a whole section about vaporwave. I mean, there are layers to vaporwave, boy, like aesthetic, like intertextual. Like I think if you're like an intellectually motivated musician, you're gonna really enjoy yourself digging in.
I love that made it into the book.
I mean, and honestly, the vaporwave is a good example of like the other thing about a lot of the lessons, especially the ones that do include some historical background, is whenever possible, we try to teach it backwards from present day, instead of saying like, here's the beginning and now we are at the end of history. We'll take something that's like current and say, where'd that come from? And then take that and say, oh, where'd that come from? And use that to create a timeline that like, maybe you can tie vaporwave back to the earliest sampler, the Fairlight, and the work of the Art of Noise, which, there wasn't a word for what they were doing when they were doing it. It was just this weird classical pop music that used a Fairlight sampler and sounded like the 80s. And you can tie that whole like idea of mixing old and new into styles like vaporwave and lo-fi hip hop, where they're trying to intentionally sound old but also sound like it's something that's new that's sounding old. That's like the whole goal of a style. Is
I'm gonna weirdly like connect this all the way back to Star Trek, just only as an excuse to include that in the podcast edit.
There's a big Star Trek reference throughout the book, but we'll do yours first.
Well, okay, just coming back to like recommending me like where I should start in Star Trek, if I'm gonna watch a show that has like a long history or like has seasons that are older, or like that just goes back in time, like an anthology, something where the seasons are all a different story, I will watch a show backwards for the exact reason that you're describing, that you should teach musical style.
So the Star Trek thing, let's jump in with this, because the Star Trek thing that's in the book, this is not a book about Star Trek. Please do not avoid this book because you're worried about that. But there's a thing they do in Star Trek that they've done in like all the series, that they call it the Prime Directive. And it's essentially like a space law that says they can't interfere with some culture that is like new in its development. And it usually refers to like a more like technologically like less advanced culture. You can't go showing them what a starship looks like. They have to like get there on their own. And so like it's kind of like a non-interference and like respect for like how a culture wants to develop and the customs they want to develop. Because if you interfere too soon and just teach them the way you do it, it will disrupt it, and then they will become like you, and they are not like themselves as much anymore. And I felt this way when I was going through high school, that like my school music program was great. I enjoyed all of the classes I took, all the bands and things. There was a little bit of that, I think tech companies call it the not invented here syndrome, where like the school groups were like on the pedestal and they were the ones that were real, and like rock bands that were developing outside of that were not as real. So they got less of a voice, they got less of a platform, they were kind of looked down upon during the talent show and stuff like that. And I started seeing that when I became a teacher, and I was like interacting with these kids that were in the rock bands, and I'm realizing that like there's independent like music learning going on everywhere, and there's ways to encourage it, and there's ways to like squash it and make it you. And it's really like this is like from a big picture standpoint of like, you know, how do your groups operate, how do you coexist with things that are like naturally developing, but also just down to like how you help a kid fix their song. You know, how much of your material are you going to allow into a project to fix a problem they have? You know, and I've, you know, early on I was like, anytime I fix somebody's song and they need help, I'm going to try to use as much material that they had already in there as possible, just so they can say it was them, even if I'm like helping them make it sound the way they want. And that's a tricky line to walk when you're like running a program that's like vertically integrated, that has like official school groups and stuff. Like, you know, if a kid's in a rock band that they formed themselves, do I like invite them to be an electronic music group? You know, that's a tricky one for me every year, is like, do I let that kind of continue on its own path at the risk of that student thinking that I don't want them in the tight circle? Or, you know, would it be better for them to be in my group? You know, that's real tricky for a teacher, since you're like involved materially and like everything. But we keep mentioning it in the book because it's something you should think about. And there's no like perfect way of pulling off the Prime Directive, but it feels like the best programs, in my opinion, have that respect for like what their students are trying to make. And the ones that kind of bug me sometimes are the ones where these are like an army of students all playing like songs from the 80s or something, like where they've obviously been given like a template of what is good music by their teacher, and that's just replacing the Western canon with some other kind of canon that's basically the same idea.
Well, and maybe I'm just like launching this into left field here, but I mean, that's an interesting idea, because running through my head this whole time is sort of this reoccurring sort of historical theme in music history, where we sort of have like I mean from a very, very, you know, early time, we have music that is sort of like almost like sort of perceived as like threatening to like the hierarchical and like governing structures of society, but then is eventually legitimized and sort of used as a force of control. I mean, you could make this argument of like the same, you know, Western kinds of styles of music that Ethan, you were touching on before. I mean, to speak to specifically one popular style of music that you can make with computers. I mean, hip hop is like 40 years old now. Like
50.
50, yeah, fair. Like at what point do the kinds of styles that you both advocate for, at what point are those no longer the styles of music that need to be advocated for? At what point are like, you know, is everything that all the kinds of musical styles we're talking about right now, is that, you know, sort of like repositioned, or are we so far from that's not even like a thought? Like, I don't know. I think about this often just with regards to like where will I be as a teacher in 30 years? I feel like I'm asking some of the right questions now, enough so that, you know, we can have this conversation. But I also wonder, like, will I get stuck in where I am now? And then like, I'm teaching music, you know, even in my general music class, I'm teaching music from like 2020 in 2040. Like, how do you go about thinking that through?
I mean, look, eventually you're going to get old and die. Like, it's going to
That comes for
happen.
us all.
You're going to get old. You're going to be the old guy, and you're going to tell the old guy stories. And eventually we're all like Abe Simpson talking about wearing an onion on your belt because it was the style at the time. Okay. Like, just like be comfortable with that first off. Like, that is going to happen. But second is like electronic music is not a genre. It's like a way of making music. Like there's a lot of genres of electronic music, right? And how you make music with electronics is a little more evergreen than some of the genres themselves. Some of the genres come from how you make music with electronics. House music has a lot of signifiers of how drum machines work in it. And there's a lot of interesting stuff that's kind of evergreen to learn in house music. So maybe that one's a little more universal of a genre. And vaporwave is maybe kind of a moment in like mid 2010s of like dissatisfaction with like the way the world works and weird like coming of age story for millennials or something. Like maybe that one is not as evergreen, but it can be used to teach how samplers work. And eventually some other kind of music will be able to teach how samplers work because you need to use samplers sometimes. And it's a thing that you can do with electronic music, right? So it's like these genres are vehicles for techniques. And the way that we've picked the genres is kind of a mix of what was special to us because it connected some kind of topic for us. It taught us how to use a drum machine, for example, or it's us listening to our students and seeing like, what are they talking about? And can I recognize the patterns in what they're talking about? Can I recognize that like American dubstep is kind of like how heavy metal was when I was in the early 90s a little bit. It's like you can use it to like teach things because we're trying to teach people how to do things. We're trying to teach people how to make things. We're trying to help them make the things that they're interested in making, but also give them like a wide experience of making things with a lot of different tools so that they've got like a bigger tool belt, right?
Yeah, I mean, the main thing is just to like learn how to stay responsive to what is going on, what the kids are bringing into the room with them. That doesn't mean you have to like be down. You don't have to be up to the minute everything. It just means be aware. Just keep your knowledge fresh and be able to connect the trends of the moment back to some of those kind of evergreens, some of those standards, because at this point, like, these genres do have standards. Like Herbie Hancock's Rocket, it's a standard. Like it's just a cornerstone. It keeps getting referred to every 10 years. Somebody samples it for something new, right? It was like very cool for a minute and then very uncool for a minute, and now it will just be cool forever, right? So yeah, like, we certainly have our preferred things, but the goal here is to foster student creativity. And our job is to know enough about what it is that they think is cool to be able to help them do that, and to be able to supply them some things, they may not be aware of, things that are a little bit more obscure or a little bit older.
Yeah, there's some things where I'll say, like, now that you are an electronic musician, we got to learn about this because it's important to a lot of other electronic musicians. So there's a little bit of that going on, but it's like I said before, it's more descriptive than it is prescriptive. So, to use Rocket as the example, if that was still uncool, we probably wouldn't have mentioned that because we're checking it out. We're listening. We're kind of sensitive to what people are talking about a little bit. And it's something, you have to be real careful about it as a teacher, how to walk that line, because, like when EMG is picking out like what songs to do, I know that some of these kids who, respect me a lot are looking at my face and stuff when they're playing the tunes, right? Like, and they're trying to like read me and figure out if like this is one of the ones he likes that he's gonna, support more or something. And it's like, that is so hard. And it's like, you have to remain like neutral, but you also have to use your like abilities as a music teacher to say, well, I can picture us being able to play this one, and I can't picture us being able to play that one for these reasons. but I like it. Can we use it in some other way? And I think that goes to like, we try to like show it like an amount of respect for our students' taste, that I do think that some of that is like I think every music teacher tries to do that. I do think that some music teachers consciously do not try to do that. I do think that that's an issue. I mean, I will be a little confrontational on that. I think that, there was a college teacher. I love this college teacher too. He's one of my favorites. But I mean, he felt like his job was to be the arbiter of taste. And I think that's the phrase he used. And, some of the stuff he picked just wasn't cool anymore. Some of this new music from the 70s that is not new anymore, but the stuff I'm talking about. It's real popular in conservatories, new music ensembles that are playing stuff that's like 50 years old. And it's like, if you like that stuff because you just like it, that's share it that way. Like, this gets me going. Like, and that's the difference. Like, I had a percussion teacher that was the same in like taste. He was also picking stuff from the 70s and making us play a lot of Steve Reich stuff and stuff. But you can just tell he genuinely liked it. And we're like, yeah, man, we'll go along with this because it's cool. It's like, it's Doc and we like Doc's. So we'll play this stuff that Doc likes, and maybe we'll be able to like tie it into something we like. And he was actually pretty responsive. Like, I remember at one point, like, he was teaching stuff about gamelan music, and you could tell he was like really into it in the world music class. And like, I remember like bringing him the Akira soundtrack and was like, dude, I heard these same instruments in here, but they like MIDI sampled. And he's like, that's cool, let me borrow that. And I still haven't gotten it back. But like, we had like a gamelan ensemble later, and it's like, that I don't know if that was because of me like bringing him that. Probably not. He was probably planning to do it already, but it's like, he was definitely confirmed by me bringing that up. And I try to be confirmed in the same way. If a student's pulling on the same thread I'm pulling on, okay, confirmation, that's good. We can go that direction because we've got some like organic support for it.
Right on. Yeah.
Can I name drop hard for a sec?
Do it.
So
Please.
The foreword of the book is written by one Adam Neely, and in his foreword, he tells the story. The YouTuber. In the foreword, he tells the story of being super into dubstep when he was in music school, and like excitedly bringing some dubstep to his jazz arranging teacher, and being like, "Could I make this happen in a jazz big band, like with the trombones or something?" And the guy was just, 1940s jazz guy was just like, yeah, let's figure it out together. I don't know anything about this music, but I want to nurture your enthusiasm. And, Adam, 10, 12 years later is still talking about that experience as a pivotal one in his life. All that guy had to do was just be generous and open-minded, right? And it's not such a big thing for us, but it can just make a world of difference to a student.
Yeah, I mean, all of these stories and things you're sharing are sort of just making me think of one of like the most formative ideas that was put in my head as I was learning to become a teacher. And that's, you sort of, you take people from the known to the unknown, and what direction what order or sequence you go in is so dependent on the kid and the experiences that they're bringing and that the culture is bringing. So yeah, I mean, I think it's great. I don't know how to cap this part of the conversation. How much time do you have? Because
soon I have to put the children to bed.
All right. I mean, do you have closing thoughts?
We are very open to, like, when this comes out, we encourage you to check it out. We encourage you to, if you're a pre-service music teacher, checking out interesting podcasts like this, like, we encourage you to check it out, maybe show your professor. We don't know how it's going to land necessarily, because we know there's a variety of opinions on the topic of how to teach music. That's like, there's so many opinions, and this is one of them. And, feel free to drop a dialogue about it. And we would love to answer questions about.
Yeah, we're on Twitter every minute of every day.
We literally are glued to our phones.
Sad but true.
Yeah. Well, it's been interesting to kind of like watch. You have been both transparent. I don't know if this is like born out of the nature of like a collaboration between two authors, but I certainly was not like transparent about writing my book on Twitter. And I don't know if I was just scared to like that I was going to say the wrong thing, but you all have just been like tweeting up a storm about, every step of the way, and it's been super fun to watch. So that's definitely heightened my enthusiasm, whether intended or not.
Yeah, I think it's just our
that's
personality.
all Ethan. Ethan's the Twitter guy. I mean, like I usually am drawn in because of something he said, but normally I'm just like lurking and afraid to, I'm the guy who like writes a tweet and deletes it immediately, and like
I can't tell you how many tweets I delete. I can't tell you. I'm just gonna confess. Well, I'm gonna confess to you, Ethan. Also, like we've like tweeted at each other a couple times in the past 2 months where I've just been like, I just got to get him on the line because I can't do it. I'm just too scared. I'm too scared to be. Twitter is like it's such a divisive, like it doesn't have to be, but like I know that it's madness. And I know that like what I'm trying to work through, like sometimes it's amazing that we have this platform where we can work through these ideas like out in the open, but I also know that like there's gonna be people who do not do generous reads of my tweet, and I'm gonna phrase it poorly, and that's part of the nature of the medium. And I'm just like, wow, do I really want this like haphazardly worded 140 characters to just live here? And it's so one of these days we'll have to continue talking about what's more sophisticated, Beethoven timpani parts or trap beats. It's one of the things that came to my mind as I was just saying that. I was just like, that is definitely an area where I was like, we were tweeting
dropping
about that.
Blood into a shark tank, saying stuff like that, man.
It's just one of those things. But no, it is true. It is kind of like magical, though, that like you can just, that this is a way that I can have been connected to this process and to, a lot of the ideas that you, and Will, don't sell yourself short. You're a pretty good, you're a less frequent tweeter, but you bring some good tweets into my timeline.
Yeah, Ethan writes a whole lot more than I do. I mean, you describe, you'd use it as like a warm up for real writing. Like I barely ever get to the real writing. It takes like pulling teeth to get me. I mean, it takes pulling teeth to get me to write anything. So like, no, I do appreciate that. And I think my biggest Twitter contribution to the book was getting an advice quote from Beck. Also, that's like the vaporwave person, Macintosh Plus. Like I couldn't believe that they responded to me. And so we were able to use some of that advice in the book and in the vaporwave chapter, which was, I mean, it was cool because it came in on the day the book was like final revisions due. So that was kind of awesome.
You name dropped them to me, and I pretended that I was cool and that I knew what was going on, but I had to search on Bandcamp, and then that became my whole afternoon. Like I've got to get down because I was just like, oh man, see, there's just so much music I'm sleeping on out there, and that's just one, I'm sure, of many.
That's a good example of a music that I was not hip to, and I'll go and talk about it at music conferences. Everybody's like, wow, how do you know things? It's like, no, a student told me that, and I was like, what are you talking about? Like, tell me all about it. I want to know what you know, like, because I want to know everything. So like, that all came from some student saying that EMG should do vaporwave, and I was like, tell me more. Like, I don't know what you're talking about. You got to listen sometimes, if there's something they know that you don't, learn about it.
Right on. All right, let me try to hit two real micro meta topics. Ethan, you're talking about writing, the lonely pursuit of writing. This is definitely, I would consider like my enthusiasm for apps to certainly have a running theme on this podcast. You are definitely someone who, like, you have tools in your arsenal that I know are similar to some of the things that I use to write. I'm just wondering if you are excited about any, like, are there any pieces of technology, like I guess I'm thinking of software in particular, that
Scrivener.
You think, yeah, that's the one.
There's just no, it's the Ableton Live of writing.
And Will, are you on board, or are you just like writing in plain text?
I don't read enough books to use Scrivener. Like I don't remember anything except what's in my head. So like I mean, my writing process, I'm sure Ethan would be horrified to like watch me actually write sometime. Like I just like blah onto a page in Pages, and I use Pages because I just don't like how Word looks. It's very superficial.
Oh, Pages is so much better than Word. So much better. I
mean, it's not as compatible with like track changes and stuff, so I get it. Like I have to have Word around. Yeah, no, you're like brave. You were opening the copy edits and Pages. I was afraid to do that.
Pages is fine. If you have a Mac, never touch Microsoft Word again. It'll just brighten your whole existence to not do it anymore.
So you're both Pages users. So I've got to ask you this: did you at any point in the process do the thing where you like both? You share an iCloud link and you're both typing in a Pages document from the native Mac app at the same time?
No. No, we used Google Drive to sync our stuff, which usually worked, except for the one time it like got rid of a whole like week's worth of work.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah, we weren't as scrupulous about version control as we perhaps could have been.
Yeah, I mean, it was like good enough, basically. Like, I don't know if it was like the best way to keep our stuff in sync. Basically, we would just kind of have a text thread open of like who's working on what right now. And if it was like the situation where like Ethan's going to follow me with copy edits, I'd just be like, chapter 10's in the can. And then he'd be like, chapter 10's in the can. Like,
So okay, so I'm putting it together. So you're both using Scrivener and Pages respectively for like getting text, from your brain into a computer, and then you're sort of like exporting that into some sort of shared Google Drive environment.
Yeah.
I have no idea how he's using Scrivener, but I think that a lot of it is like references, right?
I mean, it's basically just like an XML folder hierarchy for plain text or rich text files. You could probably accomplish the same thing on the Macintosh Finder if you were sufficiently motivated, but it organizes all your little fragmentary rich text file documents into a nifty hierarchy, and you can just export that hierarchy literally as an outline. If the program did nothing else, I would recommend buying it just for that. But you can also just export a hunk or the entire thing as one contiguous, Word document or plain text file or whatever format it is that you need it to ultimately be in. And I also find just going from Scrivener to Pages, the font changes and everything looks different, and like typos jump out in the one format that I had been staring at for hours in the other format.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, Will, I would describe it as it's like if you combined a really solid outlining tool with a word processor, but the word processor is like a bare bones text editor. So basically, just imagine you have a bunch of text files that represent your chapters, so you can write in a much more freeing and nonlinear way. And then if you decide actually this idea does not go in the beginning, it goes like here, and then you just basically drag. There's like a left sidebar with the order of your thoughts, and then you basically just drag and drop it where it makes sense. And then I'm curious.
That's cool.
It's very cool. Yeah. And Ethan, I'm curious if you use this, because the one thing, I have a couple of ideas for a second book that I don't know if they'll ever happen. But one of the things that is important to me in my own organizational life is like just having ways of getting data captured quickly. And I know that Scrivener has like this sort of like note card graphical user interface for research collection. Do you do that, like clip stuff in there, like quick quotes and thoughts and web articles?
Oh yeah, I mean, I'm writing my dissertation in it. Yeah, it works great for that. Again, I mean, you could do the same thing in any outliner or Evernote or anything like that if you were disciplined about having like an information ontology, right? Scrivener just makes it easy to change your mind about your organizational scheme as you go along, which if you're me and your organization emerges at the end of the project, not the beginning of it, is very helpful.
Or you just write all of the paragraph headings only and then have the co-author fill them in with well-researched documentation. It's like, I feel like some of the book like was written a little bit like sometimes people say like Apple starts with the advertisement and works their way backwards. Like, I feel like some of it like felt like that because he's just got the research chops. I mean, I'm kind of writing from experience in a lot of it, which it's fun that it converged in the way it did because, my writing could not be less organized than it is, but it's a pretty well organized book.
Yeah, that's been a fun piece of the collaboration to definitely watch because you all have been pretty, again, on Twitter, pretty transparent about that sort of relationship, and I think it's cool. It's cool to see it happen. All right, I had to geek out about Scrivener for a second because it's awesome. And also, I'll just put this out there for anyone who seems interested in this. I think Scrivener, maybe Ethan, you can correct me if I'm wrong, I think it juggles the OPML file format pretty well, which is like it's like an outlining file type. And there's a cool app called Omni Outliner and another one called MindNode, which are an outlining and a mind mapping application respectively. And they're both cool for just sort of like getting brain dumps into, and then they just like will magically import your hierarchy into Scrivener where you can start like fleshing out text. It's a treat.
I unfortunately have an exhausted 5-year-old leaning on me right now, so I got to go read her Ramona and her father. All
right, Ethan, you're gonna miss tech tip, album, and app of the week. You just have to tell me later. I'll link some stuff in the show notes. Will, are you okay to like? Can you like geek out about the M1 iPad situation for like a minute with me?
Right. Yeah. You guys enjoy that. You guys enjoy that. I'm gonna sign.
Okay. I think are we all here? Hello. Oh.
Okay. Hi. Yeah, I'm here. That was weird. You like cut out for a second. I panicked.
Oh, he's gone. Bye, Ethan.
Okay.
Yeah,
All
he
right.
very obviously had to go.
Yeah.
Okay, well, that's decent timing. I feel like I had one more micro topic I wanted to talk about, if you have a second.
My kids are older.
Yeah, it's so funny. Yeah, the staggering here is just interesting because it's like my kid went to bed like right before we started recording, obviously like
Yep.
5. It's funny, I can now like sort of chart like, okay, when he's 5, it's now, and then when are your kids going to go to bed? Like,
Yeah, my 12 and 15-year-old are going to go to bed at like 11.
are they in virtual school?
Yeah, it's a stupid year, but they're hanging in there. They're troopers.
That's great.
And this is move week, so everything's all crazy this week. Everybody's stuff is in boxes.
It's nuts. So I think it was probably implied, but my whole story earlier about my home living situation is just that like we packed up 26 years of my life into this giant moving truck, and I remember taking a picture of it right before we unloaded it into the new house and thinking, I will never do this again.
Yeah. Well, when we were cleaning out my dad's house, he never threw anything away. Every piece of paper he ever got was in that house. And I mean, every toy I used to have was in the attic, just neatly boxed up in these little boxes. And it was the same thing. We had to go through like everything from my whole childhood. It's crazy.
Yeah, well, and now, so what's funny is like not only was there all the stuff that was like mine from childhood that had stayed with me, but my mom in a gesture of goodwill at some point like took all of my old toys and clothes. I'm talking about like all of my toys and clothes, and packed them into this really tiny storage area in the house that she now lives in. And when our son was born, like it within a week, but the boxes just start coming back over. She's like, all right, you got this sweet new house. And I'm no longer a storage.
No.
And I'm like, well, hold on, Mom, wait a second. And this is like a classic case of Mom was right. Like, I'm like, no, I never asked you to keep this stuff. And then all of a sudden we're taking pictures of my son in the onesie that I came home from the hospital.
Yep.
And I'm like, oh, she was right.
Kind of cool.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, okay. After watching Apple's events where they announced, like AirTags and a colorful iMacs and the iPad a few weeks ago, we were texting and you were like, they put the M1 chip, which is the chip that, for anyone who doesn't, I think probably if you're listening to this podcast, you know that like the new chip inside of the current consumer level MacBooks is like Apple makes it in house. It's got great reviews. It's like a very big change in computing. It's fast, it's efficient, it's great. They're putting that in the next generation of iPad Pros. And you said to me that you think I believe that it's possible for a Mac app to run on an iPad if it has an M1 chip in it. But you told me that you think it will happen, and we need to unpack this.
Well, and then like the day after that, like one of the executives was like, it will not happen. So I don't know. I feel like they took the wind out of the sails on that one. I mean, I think that there's a couple things that, it's like, I think they're trying really hard to carve out the place for the iPad, and, at the expense of, you can run Mac apps on it. And I think that they're doing some kind of interesting work on that problem of like, what's the use case for these things, and where is it appropriate to have drag and drop, and where is it appropriate to have touch? And they're trying to really clearly draw that line, and they're now saying that it's a line that's deeper than just what hardware it's running, I guess. And I mean, I think that's a little disappointing, because there should be something for like an equivalent of that. What's that dingus way that they can take iPad apps and put them on the Mac now? It's like, well, even like, isn't it like on the M1s, can't you just like run them if they opted in? And there's like a menu that it's called something like touch compensation or something like that, where it's like, here's how you do all the gestures that you should be able to do with your fingies, but you can't. And it's like, I think that tells you there's like a clue there. It's like Apple usually doesn't put something that awkward in the interface because it's like an admission of not being cool or something. So like, I think that's kind of a clue. I wonder, now that this iPad's out, and it was awkward hearing them talk about some other video editing app that's not Final Cut Pro, is okay, like, maybe they're just holding that stuff back so that some other things can flourish on the iPad, and it's not, going to discourage people from writing stuff like that. That could be the strategy. And the other thing is, like, a lot of professionals do use, like the biggest MacBook they can find that's like got all the stuff in it. So now you've got this iPad that's got this really great screen for viewing video content, but no professional video editing app. So that, for me, that was why I was saying, oh, this has got to be coming. But now I'm like, maybe the play is a little different than that. Maybe that screen's going to end up on a MacBook, and maybe the MacBook will have a touch screen or something, done like that. I don't know. It just would be really nice if, like, companies that have like a real good Mac app could just like do a couple things and get it to run on an iPad in the same way that iPad apps can do that on a Mac. Is it ideal? No. Do you have to do some weird workarounds because it's not the right interface? Well, yeah. But, with an iPad that can have a big trackpad and stuff, like, I mean, they're not shying away from doing that on other platforms. Like, I'll download apps on my Apple TV and it's like, you got to have a controller for this. So, I mean, why couldn't they have an app on the iPad store that says you got to have the keyboard and mouse for this? Like, I mean, it seems like it's technically possible to do it that way, and they just have to want to do it. That's the toughest thing to tell, is if they want to do it or not.
Yeah, I think you could argue that the other possible play, which is not like entirely different than what you're describing. By the way, if anyone is not following this, last episode, David McDonald and I talked about Fourscore, which is like an iPad app that uses this exact technology, which is like where a developer can take an iPad app and really easily put a Mac version of it on the Mac App Store. And then what you're talking about is like this other layer of it, which is if you're running one of these new Macs with the M1 processor, you don't even have to develop a Mac version of your iPad app. You can just check a box that will let your iOS app run on a Mac unchanged. And I guess the question is, like, as Apple creates tools that help developers to take iPad apps that are good and then not just make them run on the Mac, but make them like good, like Mac apps that feel like Mac apps and take advantage of Mac-like things. Could they eventually flesh out those tools to such an extent that the actual play is that Apple rewrites things like Final Cut Pro and Logic Pro for the iPad, and then that gets so powerful that then they just port that version to the Mac? Basically, they go in the same direction that they've been going for the past 2 years, but they just make the iPad versions powerful enough that they're viable solutions for professionals.
Yeah, maybe. I mean, I think that, like, having the M1 is like, that's a cool marketing thing. The iPad having Thunderbolt seems like, who's like asking for that exactly? Because, like, okay, like, what do I have that's Thunderbolt? Like, I've got a Thunderbolt display, and that probably works because it's just a display. Cool. Okay, but you could do display out before with an iPad, just not at like a 1,000 zillion hertz or whatever. It doesn't matter. Like, you could still do it. So, okay, hard drives, you could do hard drives before. Like, what is Thunderbolt that needs to, like, have that? And it's like, well, okay, what has to do Thunderbolt? Some audio interfaces, external GPUs. Like, this is stuff that cannot run with an iPad right now. So I mean, I doubt they put it there for their health because it costs more. So, who's plugging Thunderbolt stuff into their iPad right now? I would love to know. Write me a letter.
Right. Yeah. No, Apple is a company that likes to tell stories about their product making decisions. And like, this has got to be the year that, and for those who don't know, in a couple of weeks, they're going to have their developer conference, which for me, I'm like a software guy. I always get way more excited about seeing what iOS will be able to do next fall than I do like the new iPhone. And
and there's definitely like a little bit of a story already happening. Like, I don't care who says what about what. Spacing out all those icons in Big Sur, making all the big buttons touch targets. Like, I just seems like they're laying the breadcrumbs to get up on a stage and say, like, what we realized is these buttons would be great to touch, don't you think? And it's like, yeah, you're so right. And it's like, they always do that, where like they'll say like, that's the worst idea ever. And then like finally they do it and they're like, this is actually the best idea now that we've done it. And it's like that's just like classic Apple marketing stuff going on. So it's like it will be a very interesting WWDC.
Yeah, I'm hoping that the iPad gets big stuff. I mean, I think that the other part of the story of like having the Thunderbolt and the new display on this new iPad has got to be that this is the time where we will finally see some pro apps, like Apple made pro apps. I hope so.
I mean, because all the examples they gave were like Hollywood people need this because of the AR, and it's like, well, there's a good example actually of like a professional needing an iPad versus a laptop. That is such a narrow example that I doubt that that's the only thing they're going to do with it. You know, some guy at ILM doing previs for the next Star Wars movie is like not the target audience for that.
Sure. And I mean, if it's, most comfortable for you to be sitting at your desk with lots of power, I mean, I get that. Like I would have like if I did all of my work at a desk and I never took any home and that was my job, I would want a Mac Pro plugged into a wall. But for me, I don't do that. I'm a music teacher and I, juggle lots of like some side hustle things. And for me, it's like really convenient to be able to like throw down some email on the couch on my iPad at the end of the day. And it would also be really convenient to edit this podcast in Logic Pro on my iPad on the couch at the end of the day.
Yeah, for me, it's like Final Cut would be very convenient on an iPad because it has a nice camera on it. And it's like just like shooting something on a green screen real fast and like comping it together on something that's powerful, editing with that pen. Like there's a lot of things that thing would speed up Final Cut Pro in a good way. Because it's like iMovie's just limited, but you can feel how it would make it nice.
Power ceiling aside, like is there anything really that is better about Mac hardware these days than iPad hardware? Like to me, the iPad is so much more compelling. Like it's just something as simple as
it has a headphone jack. I think that's still kind of important for audio people to have an audio interface that's built into the computer is still very helpful in an emergency.
I totally, that's totally valid. And it's something I could not live without, but I guess I'm just trying to think about what do I need most of the time? And most of the time it's not that I need as much as it is, I'm on my Mac and I need to sign a PDF. Here I am. I'm taking my iPad out of my bag now and I'm basically just opening up the same email I was already like, why can't I just touch the Apple Pencil on the screen? Like, or I'm preparing some classroom materials and I need to scan a piece of sheet music to embed in like
it's funny, I feel the opposite about the signature thing that you just mentioned because Preview on the Mac can save all the signatures. Like that's so easy.
Maybe, yeah. Well, okay. Maybe a better example would be like annotating the score. Like for example, the other day I was sharing Fourscore with my students, and the Fourscore Mac app, it exists now, so I can.
Dude, everybody's using iPads on the stage like to read scores off of. That's just like normal now.
It's so normal, and it's like I want to be just sharing the Mac version because that's obviously the most convenient thing to share from the Google Meet screen share settings, but then all of a sudden I want to annotate something and I'm like, well, I'm not gonna like click with my mouse, like it's so imprecise. So what I end up doing is instead I screen share Air Server and then I stream my iPad version of Fourscore to the screen.
Yeah.
And I'm just like, this is just so many steps. It's just so much easier to use the hardware that's in many cases more flexible, which you could make lots of arguments for why the Mac hardware is so much more flexible, but I would say the Mac is so much more flexible device more because of its software than it is its hardware. Whereas the iPads,
what we need is that thing from Minority Report where you just plug the little screen into the big screen and the big screen turns into what the little screen was doing, but better.
Well, I'm telling you, like I don't know, and I'm being an armchair guy right now. I'm saying here's what they should do. But like it doesn't make that much sense to me why sometime soon in the not too distant future I can't run iPad OS in tablet mode from the couch, and then the second I snap it to that magic keyboard, it's running something closer to Mac OS. Something OS. I don't know. I don't know how to make that elegant. That sounds like something that is good in theory.
Give me Little Sir or whatever, some kind of like, maybe it can't do every single thing, like maybe I don't have terminal access or something like that, but it's close, like That would be very interesting.
Yeah, it's definitely what I want to see, because it's weird. I do agree. Something you said last time we were talking on the air was that, you know, Apple lives in this gray area where it's like, if they have the devices not quite covering the same ground, then you'll buy more stuff. But I actually don't think that Apple has a history of like they've never been afraid to cannibalize their own product line. Like, they'll make a product good knowing full and well that it's going to make you buy less. Like the iPhone cannibalized the iPod. Like, they don't sell that many iPods anymore. They knew that when they made the iPhone. Like, no one's going to want to buy just a music player anymore, but that didn't stop them.
They only cannibalize it when it's like a big opportunity, though. Like, they are happy to have you fully invested. You know, like, they want you to get all the accessories for the thing. You know, they want you to have the thing that works with the other thing. You know, the iPad's the trickiest one, I think, because if you have a watch and a phone and a laptop and an Apple TV and you've got everything else, and it's just real hard to picture needing the iPad because it's just another thing to charge. You know, like, it's tough to make those niches, and they're pretty good at it. And I think that's always been the story for me, is like, where does this thing fit in exactly? And some people, it's what they love, you know. And I think maybe what they're finding out is that there's just different kinds of users that, you know, they want the simplified thing that's more like a phone because it makes sense to them. And, you know, people who want MacBooks, they want to be able to break their computer sometimes, you know. And that's a valid thing to want, is like, do I want a game console or a computer? And sometimes I want a computer, and sometimes I want a game console. You know, a game console is not going to break. It's going to last a little longer. I'm not going to push the boundaries of it because there's just not as much to push. But, you know, a computer, it's going to be a pain in the ass sometimes, right? You know?
Yeah, coming from someone who has built a PC and has like straddled that line, that's actually a pretty good analogy. I appreciate that, because yeah, I mean, it is exactly that. There's so much crossover between what you can do with these two devices. But yes, there's, you know, it's just that, like, that weird gray area. And I think what's probably most likely, as much as it disappoints me, is that Apple will continue to make the Mac do things that are iPad-like, and the iPad will do things that are Mac-like slowly over time, and we'll just continue to be like living in this increasingly gray area between the two. And
it's like, what works for you. You know, I'll tell you what, if you want to use the iPad to do Mac stuff, it is not the most cost-efficient way to do it. You know, to take an iPad that's got the same specs as the MacBook Air and add on all that keyboard stuff to it is very not cost-effective.
Sure, no, it's way more expensive than a MacBook Air. I mean, a MacBook Air for $1,000 is arguably one of the best computers you can buy right now. Yeah, so it's like, why at this point buy this new iPad Pro with M1 chip with Apple Pencil and Magic Keyboard for, I don't know, like what, $1,200 to $1,600? I haven't priced it out, but it's like, you know, why do that if?
I do think there's people who live on them, though. I mean, I'm not one of them, and that's why it's hard to picture, because I picture an iPad being like what you were talking about, where it's like, this is the fun computer that's for doing lazy stuff, you know, and writing an email or reading a book or something. But like, I think there are people who live off their iPad and that's their computer. And I think a lot of them are artists. Like, I've seen, like, the kids that I see with them, with like the ones that have the pencil and like the newer kind of style, they're all artists. They're all using Procreate. And it's like a new type of computer or something, you know, it's like a totally new thing, which that's kind of cool to see. But like, they don't have a music version of that, in my opinion. Like, yeah, Peter Kern does a really good job trying to like get you to want to use one, because, you know, he kind of pictures it being this like versatile synthesizer, and that's like a decent argument to make. But I've got that already on a computer, so it's like, I don't need it just because of the touch interface. That usually doesn't make it better for me.
I do think, though, that there are, you know, as far as like touch input goes, the pencil is so precise and feels so good that there are musical kinds of projects that I wouldn't mind being able to do. Like, I don't edit this show in it anymore, but Fairwrite is like a DAW for.
Oh, it's like a tape editor kind of thing.
Yeah, it's like it's actually an audio editor that's designed for speech, I think, because a lot of the features that you can do are designed around like sort of eliminating blank space in between speech and, you know, trimming things together and you know, getting rid of crosstalk and stuff. But it's all like, well, there's lots of different ways you can edit the audio, the waveform, but the Apple Pencil is like this primary sort of like gestural input device that they've really thought through. Like, if you see a part, like if I see, you know, like let's just say like, I hesitate in my conversation and I'm listening back to my podcast and I see a little cut, a place I want to cut a little bit of what I was saying out. You just basically highlight with the Apple Pencil exactly the part that you want to delete, but backwards from the, the most recent part of the time back to the beginning of where you want to make the cut. And then when you let go of the pencil, it deletes it and then snaps everything and all the tracks forward to where that was. That's and then cool. adds a little crossfade. So, that kind of thing.
Yeah, that's the kind of stuff, like, it's still the Wild West, like that's a cool, like, idea, but like, maybe you can't live there 100% of the time yet because of other limitations, and I mean, an iPad, you're not connected to all your stuff usually. So that's like the main limitation. That's why I thought it was weird they added Thunderbolt to it. It's like, okay, am I going to like sit down and like plug a power supply to an Apollo in and like connect that to my iPad? Like, I don't know.
Yeah. That's why I'm almost certain we're getting at least Final Cut this June.
Here's hoping. I've been waiting for it since the beginning.
Yeah, my body is ready, and my wallet if they say it's M1 only.
I'm holding out for the new Mac Cube. I'm really hoping on that rumor being true.
Yeah, I have. Yeah, there's some smoke behind that. I would consider that. My last desktop computer that I own. Well, I guess my Mac Mini counts, but before that, it was a 2008 Mac Pro, and I bought that thing from a friend of mine. He had it to do some graphic design work, and then he moved to Japan and just downsized. And I bought that thing for like a fourth of the price that he paid for it. Ooh. And it lasted 10 years.
Those are awesome. I have a couple trash cans right now, and they're great. One of them started to blink a little bit, and so I traded it in for some store credit, but I'll probably keep the other one around for a little while. And I mean, I just think those are kind of fun because it's just like, these are computers for like, these are not mass market devices. So they just like pull out all the stops,
Right. But a Mac Pro that didn't cost over $6,000 would honestly be kind of tempting to me.
Totally.
But I'm living.
All right,
also...
I'm going to need to wrap this up soon because I can tell my family's starting to wonder what's happening.
I think that's totally fair. All right, tech tip of the week.
Okay, so tech tip of the week. If you have a computer that has multiple user accounts, and it should be part of your troubleshooting to figure out if there's another copy of the DAW running on the other side of the computer. There's my tech tip of the week. If you are logged in as two people and Ableton Live is running on two people's accounts, your computer will not be happy and everything will break.
It's a good one. And I don't think about it often, but absolutely it's true.
I thought about it because I was loaning laptops out to kids. So I made them log into like a student account, but all the EMG sets are run off my account. And I was neglecting the fact that it was like auto logging into that student account. And we were having some glitches, and it's like, oh, that's why.
Yeah. Okay, I don't know if I can keep this music. I didn't think of a music tech related one. I just thought of a.
That's fine. I'll come up with another one. Here's another one. If you use Google Drive file stream for anything, it was recently updated in a very annoying manner. And if you are about to do something mission critical with it, make sure it's up to date because it is broken as soon as you log in. And you have to restart 3 times to get it working again because they rewrote it entirely, and you have to enable the security thing 3 times.
Okay, I got the first of those 3 prompts right before I booted up to record this. So I'm glad actually that you mentioned that.
It's at least for me, it made me do that at least twice on every computer. Not more times.
I could spend an hour talking to you about Google File Stream, so I'm going to move on. Did you know that there are new Siri shortcut automation triggers in iOS 14.5? That's right. You can have opening an app or closing an. I think closing an app is now a trigger. So what I am doing is apps that I often watch video in landscape in. I have an automation trigger that says when I open YouTube, then lock the phone into landscape. And it's automatic. It's a basic if-then statement in the Shortcuts app, which all of you listeners have installed on your phone, whether you've opened it or not. It's very, very easy to.
I've never opened it. I've never thought of a reason to open it yet, so I'll have to check it out.
I will link that shortcut for people to steal in the show notes. Album of the week. Last time you were here, I don't know if it was your app or your album, but you told me about Poolside FM, and I have been listening to it every week since then.
Wait, I thought of this because I knew you'd be asking this question. But let me make sure I get the title right. So this was another one, like a student suggested this at one point, and I was not hip to it. But what is the album called? Oh, it's just called, okay, so this is the album and band Suburban Lawns. And this is a 1981 like indie art rock album. And the lead single off the album is this song called Janitor. And it's really strange. And I love it.
I can only hope that it will get me through the next 6 to 12 months as Poolside FM has.
Oh, dude, this will not get you through 6 months, but this is like a cool track. And it's like, it's got a nice mix of like, it's got a little bit of like that Riot Girl punk sound, but also it's got like that like weird new wavy Oingo Boingo sound a little bit to the vocals. And it's just so strange. They only came out with one album, and the song's really good. I don't know if the whole album's really good, but I'm assuming it is.
Awesome. Have you heard of Tauk? I think it's pronounced Tauk or Tauk. Tauk.
I don't think so.
I feel like they can best be described as I guess they're not a jam band like in the way that Fish is a jam band, but they're jammy in nature.
Okay.
And they're a little funky, but they're like harder than a funk band. But yet at the same time, it's the kind of band that I would want to see at like an outdoor festival or like, at a like on a nice summer day, at an outdoor event. Like they're just good.
That stuff is like in style right now.
It's very like groove centered and danceable, but it's also nice. Like it's all instrumental, and it's like it's really, really like it's just really melodic. It's the kind of thing like where none of the parts are particularly like vocal or like I'm about to contradict myself. None of the parts are like lyrical necessarily, but they're all super singable. Like everything that the bass player, the keyboardist, and the guitarist plays is just all gets stuck in your head.
Well, that's fun. I'll have to check it out.
I'm bummed. We saw Corey Henry open for them at a small venue in Baltimore City, and we knew about this band, but we were like not totally into them yet, and so we were enjoying ourselves, but we like kind of left halfway through their set because we were feeling tired. I would not do that today, given my experience with them. Now I'll link the album we've been listening to more recently is Shapeshifter 2 : Outbreak. I don't know if there's a Shapeshifter 1, but
that sounds very proggy.
Yeah, I would say so. All right, app of the week. Cool. I think this was an app of the week from one of my guests a few weeks ago, but it's fine. I'm stealing it. It's called Tauk. It's a free Mac app. It is an ephemeral note-taking app that is pretty much plain text only. It limits you to 7 different notes, which I kind of weirdly like that it has this limitation, because it's like if I'm using a tool for ephemeral note-taking, like why would I ever need more than 7 notes? Like the whole point is that I'm deleting it after a day. And it's like really beautiful. It's designed by the Icon Factory. They're the people who make that Twitterific Twitter app, and it's nice. It looks really pretty. Their business model is weird. Like if you really love the app and you want to sync your notes, you can buy a $20 iPhone version, but the Mac app is free. The way I explain it to people is like I say, you know what? Do you really want to use that Stickies app on your Mac and have like 800 stickies all over, or do you want to just have it all confined in one nice, neat little window that essentially syncs it over iCloud, which I don't know if Stickies syncs to anything, but Tauk does, and it's a beautiful, simple app, and if you only ever use it on your Mac, it is free.
All right, this is like, I don't like use third-party apps that much unless it's like a store and I have to on my phone or like a game or something, but this one is cool, and this is a local shout out. Local Cincinnati indie radio has an app for their radio channel, and it's called Inhaler, and spelled IN and then like the word hail, like HAALER, and Inhaler Radio. And it's just like good local Cincinnati alternative radio over the internet. It's a bunch of ex Northern Kentucky University radio people that kind of started their own station a couple years ago, and it's cool. I listen to it sometimes. We don't get that kind of localized information on this show every week, so I dig it. Repping the Cincinnati scene. That's right, for sure. Should we call it? I think so. I think we're done, man. Yeah. Put a fork in it. Yeah, we're there. Hey, I do appreciate you having us on, though. That was fun. It's always a pleasure to talk to you. Yeah, totally. We'll do it again sometime, probably not that long from now. And, excited about the book. Talk to you soon, man. Thanks again. Absolutely. Thanks.
I'm Robby Burns. Thanks for listening to Music Ed Tech Talk. You can find the show's page, show notes for this episode, and my blog at musicedtechtalk.com. You can subscribe to the blog either through an email newsletter or through an RSS app of your choice. And you can subscribe to the podcast in the podcast app of your choice. If you like this show, it will only take you a few taps to give it a very, very favorable rating in your podcast app. I would appreciate that very much. Word of mouth is helpful too, so please spread the word about it in your everyday conversations and on social media. You can learn more about my teaching and music career at robbyburns.com. You can buy my book at digitalorganizationtipsformusicteachers.com. I'm on Twitter, Facebook, and YouTube, and most of the other social networks at Robby Burns. Thanks to this episode's sponsor, the DMV Percussion Academy. Be sure to check them out at dmvpercussion.org, and I'll see you next time.